Hello, and welcome to mentorDINO. I'm your host, Katelyn Rossier. I am an architect and founder of mentorDINO. I firmly believe that architecture, engineering, and construction professionals can achieve true success by embracing human skills as their guiding principle. So each week, I interview amazing professionals in and around the AEC industry as a way to share stories, inspiration, and advice for others finding their own unique career path. Thank you to all of our current subscribers, and if you're new, we'd love to have you join our community. So if you like this episode, please do me a favor and hit subscribe, like, or leave a comment below. It really helps others be able to discover this resource and support them on their own career journey. So let's dive in. I really hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome to the mentorDINO podcast. I would like to welcome Andrew Ellsworth, founder and CEO of Doors Unhinged in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Thank you so much, Andrew, for taking the time to speak with me today.
It's my pleasure, Katelyn. Thanks for having me.
So I always start out with my loaded question.
Oh, good.
And do you mind?
No softballs to start. Come on. Okay.
No. Yeah, just throw it in strong. And so do you mind introducing yourself and letting my listeners know about your experience and journey so far in your career and education?
Sure. Okay. So my name's Andrew Ellsworth. I run a company called Doors Unhinged, based in Pittsburgh, as Katelyn said. My company reclaims and resells commercial door systems. So we salvage doors, frames, and hardware out of commercial buildings being renovated or demolished, such as offices, university buildings, retail, medical spaces, hospitals, things like that. And then we sell them back as zero carbon and lower cost alternatives to new. There are no companies in the US doing anything like this. And so we've really been on the forefront of what is hopefully a movement in commercial material reuse.
So how did you get to that point of deciding to start the business? Do you have more of a background in sustainability, carbon, AEC?
All of the above, yeah. So I'm trained as an architect. I was never really a practicing architect. That wasn't my calling. But I've been working at the intersection of sustainability and the built environment for my entire career. So I worked in sustainable real estate development, as if there is such a thing. I worked in green building and lead consulting for many years. I ran a sustainability consulting outfit for several years as well. And then I joined the Green Building Alliance, mostly focused on things like indoor air quality and environmental health, primarily in K-12 schools. So I think what set me up for what I do is probably a combination of being in the green building space and trying to utilize environmentally friendly materials, while also being on the board of Construction Junction, which is a material reuse center here in Pittsburgh, and realizing that they just didn't fit, right? They could never get those two to work very well. We could give Construction Junction material, but it was hard to actually procure material from Construction Junction to go into projects. It's just, the model wasn't right. And so that, is kind of the basis for entrepreneurship, is like, you have to find the problem and you have to know the industry well enough that it's not generic, but it's very, very specific. So just set out really to find a way to use high quality commercial building materials, knowing that tons and tons and tons of those are disposed all the time, and often, well before they're at end of life.
Yeah, so I know like Shaw does the reclaimed carpet program. Most carpet companies do at this point. How did you decide to focus on doors?
Yeah, so in that thinking, I was looking at products that were readily accessible, that were in pretty much every building. They were modular, standardized in various ways. Stores can be very custom, but a lot of them are about the same size. High value. We need to be able to make a margin on the doors, in the sense that we can't sell them at the same price as new. So if we're going to go through all this effort and we got to give a discount, is it really worth it? And high quality, high value materials are kind of the place that we wanted to start, knowing that volume would be low initially. And so the margin really helps the business succeed. Whereas other material types like carpet, like ceilings, are commodity products and they're worth a lot less. And so you got to have high volume to make those businesses work. And we knew that's not how the business was going to start out. We looked at other products that kind of fall into that category, lighting, and casework.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge with casework was it really isn't that modular, and it's each kind of set. It's has its own characteristics, and there's nothing that's really like standard out of the box casework, right? It's all custom fabricated. Really high value though. The other was lighting. At the time when I conceived it was like mid 20 teens. And so
Mm-hmm.
right in the middle of technology transfer, moving from fluorescent to LEDs. And so what that spells is everyone's getting rid of fluorescents and everyone's buying LEDs. So if you take fluorescent, you're not going to be selling those. So funnily enough, doors have not particularly changed. It's a very low innovation space. And so the doors we buy today are pretty much the same as they were 40 years ago. So,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, we wanted to start somewhere and see what was successful and see what was going to work. But I think our primary premise was that we needed to focus on one product type. We couldn't be a construction junction or a material reuse center of commercial materials and have all kinds of commercial materials, right? It was like, that's, we do a good job at servicing no one, right? You have a little bit of everything, and that's not what those customers want. They want to call you and have you service a specific thing, right? So we had to pick a product type. And furthermore, we recognized that the product type is actually a system. And so that's a whole other complexity and layers. Like you have to think of these things as systems, as not individual types. It's not doors, it's openings, right? It's a door frame and hardware. And so these are all like the nuances that make it so different than working in residential materials.
Yeah. Because it's pretty much like, I know when you helped me on a project, it was, hey, what size doors do you need? It would, fairly standard 3.0 by 7.0 or 3.0 by
Right,
8.0 or
exactly.
most of them. And then it's like, okay, do you need hollow metal or
Right.
wood? There's a bulk of the decisions that are
That's
made.
right.
And I guess if it's also being flexible as the designer, because I know I was asking you
Mm-hmm.
questions on what's in stock, what's the
Right.
process,
Right.
what do you have? And I can lean different directions. Or if you didn't have a 3.0, but you had a 3.6, I can get that to
Right.
work in one
Yeah.
spot. So, but as long as the heights were all the same,
That's
it
right. And
worked.
that you said actually the magic word in this space, which is flexibility. And architects are not historically that good at being flexible about things, but they can be. They just need to
Mm-hmm.
feel like they actually have control over how the flexibility is being applied. Right. But yeah, it's all about how do we work with the materials that are available, which is kind of a mindset shift from I specify whatever I want and then people go and make it on our behalf. And so I like to
Yeah.
say it's kind of the modern version of vernacular materials, right? Where when people had what they had to work with, wherever they were, they were based, right? It's like the local materials that were available, and that's what you built with. And you adapted your buildings and you adapted your designs to utilize those materials. And so it's coming back. And I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah. So what's the process on your side for trying to find the doors to reclaim, getting them in house, and then I know you can relaminate, paint to get them ready to go for a project. So what's that process?
So on our end, just locating inventory is probably the easiest part. There's so much inventory to go around. We get unsolicited phone calls several times a month from people we don't know, offering us hundreds of doors from around the country. I kid you not, right? It could be like 500.
So are they calling you from everywhere?
Uh-huh.
I figured it was like Pittsburgh, Ohio, West Virginia,
Yeah,
surrounding
no,
area.
but because there's no one doing this anywhere, they're like, we'll just give it a shot. Oklahoma, Tennessee, Minnesota, Iowa, California, Boston, right? It's just, yeah, they just look it up online and like we're the ones that come up. So that was kind of an interesting realization, but that ends up being the basis for our growth, knowing that there's so much material out there and that we need to figure the logistics of getting it. And so we focused in the Pittsburgh area in acquiring material because the logistics are so much simpler, right? Just send out a truck, load it up, bring it back. There's two ways for us to do that. One is we actually go and dismantle things ourselves, which in the industry is known as deconstruction, right? We're not demolishing it, we're carefully taking it apart. And so in some ways we prefer that because it helps us control the quality of the material coming out, and we're not relying on others and the whims and how much they're interested. Yeah, exactly. They're not known for careful handling, right? What you really need is carpenters, and you don't often get that. So when we go and do it, if there's stuff that ends up being damaged or we like see that it is damaged, we don't have to take it. We'll just leave it. The other option is some other people will take it out and stage it at a loading dock, and very rarely we've had people actually take it out and ship it to us. Don't love that so much because we don't have the quality control before it's in our hands. So yeah, I mean, there's just that's the easy part, right? There's so much material out there, it's being thrown away, and so pretty much anyone is going to be happy to give you something that they would otherwise throw away. Now, once it's in the facility, we like to know what we have and we kind of organize it to make sure like we understand when it's time for sale, what other components need to go with it. At that point, that's where we're trying to match it up with a project. So take, for example, your office. As you and I were talking, it was kind of a process of, okay, here are some options. It's like, and it depended. It was like, what kind of hardware do you want? What kind of finish do you want? And that sort of starts to narrow it down. And in some cases, it narrows it down so much where you have nothing, right? Which is the point at which we have to say, all right, is this absolutely what you want? Or do you have flexibility to have fewer parameters? And then that increases like the odds of us being able to service the project. From there, we just work with designers to try and integrate these goals into the construction documents such that when it goes out to bid, contractors or even subcontractors know to contact us and understand what the goals are of the project. That doesn't always work that well, and that's where one of the friction points is that handoff and developing really good documentation to kind of thread the needle through the process. Been working with a group in Minnesota to develop a whole specification suite, Division 1, Division 2, and also Division 8 for our products, such that it's in the specs, it's in the table of contents, and it's very specific about how this process is supposed to go, what the architect is looking for, and who they should contact for these materials. So it's kind of a game changer. That literally was published like yesterday. So it's pretty exciting. We hope to work with projects to start to integrate that and improve it, knowing that it's really kind of a first take. No one has, to our knowledge, written a Division 1 material use spec. The deconstruction spec has been written, but it was written from the perspective of residential construction. And so we actually wrote a selective deconstruction spec, which is what we're more likely to see in commercial projects, right? Where we're cleaning out and refreshing an office space or something like that. So Great
Yeah.
stuff that's
I
happening.
was just about to ask, like, how to document it from our side. So if it's not an owner reaching out to you, but it's the design team that wants to make sure that these doors just don't
That's
go
right.
to a
That's right.
landfill,
No,
is it just more that spec section
it is
that they
never,
would need to call it out
Caitlin, it
for?
is never just the spec section. Architects would love to believe,
Because nobody
they
reads
just
it.
love to believe, just put the spec in and everything's going to solve itself. And that is not the case, right? But it's going to be kind of the thing that raises the flag to say, okay, there's something here you need to look at. We've also developed a deconstruction and reuse action plan that the specs need to be kind of generic, right? Because they're more like contract
Mhm.
language. But documents that you could have an architect write instead of a spec writer, right? That's this action plan that's essentially a list of the different pathways to achieve reuse, which is reuse within the building, reuse within a campus, reuse by a contractor. If they have materials from another project, that we want to encourage them to be able to incorporate those, reuse with companies like ours. And so, and then within that, all the things that should, how that works. If you have materials like carpet that you want to send to a take back program, that goes in there as well, right? There's a lot of things that get integrated here. So it's a whole package that then can be supplemented with notes on drawings, but it doesn't, you don't have to have the notes on the drawings do all the lifting.
Yeah. And I figured it would be more, depending if they're doing it pre-demo or during demo, noting stuff in the demo drawings with a special note. Like, I would almost want to make it a different color, a different hatch pattern to just like highlight it to them in bold that something's
Right.
different with this
That's
to
right.
call their
Or
attention.
even that it's a different drawing, right?
Yeah.
It gets its own drawing. And the idea is, in some ways, you would actually involve a deconstruction contractor or someone to do a pre-bid walkthrough and issue a report, essentially of what can and should be salvaged. And then that goes into the specs as well. And that kind of all lives in that same section. So
Yeah.
process stuff. It's all about
Exactly.
process. It's not just the product, right? It's like how we get there. The same thing, you can't just drop the spec in and figure everything's going to work out. It's starting the process early on.
Yeah. And then for anybody outside of Pittsburgh, are you gathering stuff in different warehouses? Or are you bringing it all back here? How's that working since you're
That's
more than just our local
yeah, no,
community?
that's evolving actually, and that's part of our growth plans going into 2025. Is we're striving to service the Boston to DC market, both in bringing material out and salvaging material out of there, and then selling material in. And so that will primarily be done from Pittsburgh. I will hopefully be partnering with, ideally, material reuse centers to do some of the first mile, last mile handling. And so when materials come out, they can go and do the deconstruction, stack it on pallets, and then put it on a truck and send it to us. And vice versa, when we're shipping materials, it's hard for us to ship straight to a job site. You need to ship locally and then have kind of a last mile delivery. So that's the goal in this model, that we will be able to move a lot more material. And there's one thing I'll add to this, is a new product line that we're going to be launching, which is, ta-da, a refurbished door. And so one of the big challenges we have is the doors we have are either essentially as is or paint grade. And so in your office, you went for paint grade, and that's great because we can take kind of whatever, as long as it kind of matched the size and dimensions and everything like that. Pre-finished doors, when they're as is, we can probably only deliver a package that's maybe 20 to 25 doors. And then even then, there's some difficulty. When you look at each door by itself can be a great specimen. It looks really good. But then when you bring them together as a collection, you start to see sometimes a very significant variation from one door to the next. And so theoretically, they may have all come out of the same building, or they're the same veneer and the same finish, but they start to yellow or turn orange over time, especially the clear finished ones. And so that ultimately is a problem, right? So what we're striving to do is to run them through a consistent process where doors come in with being essentially different and then go out looking the same. So we can have a select number of colors that are available, and designers can essentially specify the product like they might another product, where it's like, okay, here's the product, here's the color I want, go. There are going to be some limitations to that we can't necessarily do everything in the universe, and we're not doing style on rail doors, and we don't do residential hollow core doors. There's a lot of limitations to that. But at the same time, when we get to really standard doors, like, we should be able to deliver a package that matches and looks new, which I think ultimately has been the challenge with working with reclaimed materials, is kind of that a lack of uniformity.
Yeah. And I guess also letting you know that that's coming, because you can't just, hey, found your website and now I'm going to specify your product and then hope you have the quantity of doors.
That's right.
By that
That's
time,
right.
There's a lot more on the design side too.
Yeah, that's right.
Make sure, hey, I need 20 doors. Okay, great. I have 19. I need to collect one more in the next year while you design.
Right. But so the whole idea is, as we're taking more material, there's a finite universe of like door sizes and finishes. And so the more inventory we have available, the easier it is to meet the needs of projects. And so, plus this ability to kind of homogenize the products, I think has been really the missing piece, and will make it easier for designers to utilize this, because they don't feel like they're ceding control, and they're not going to get that, they're not risking having a substandard appearance. Whether that's true or not, that's just a perception that, like, if they don't feel like they can look at the sample and say, this is what I'm getting, then I think there's a little bit of apprehension there. It's a lot of apprehension there, actually.
But hey, when projects are on a tight budget, I know we were just doing a light refresh, so super low budget, just trying to figure out where to save money. And doors and hardware were so expensive getting it directly through the GC that I believe you saved us more than half the price that then the GC needed. Right. So that helped us a lot, and half is thousands of dollars. Right. So even if you're a small business owner, a lot of those operations are tiny, and you don't want to spend a lot of money on sometimes, like, even back of house spaces or an office, when you have like a front space that's more for clients. Like, that can save you a lot of money in the end. That can be rent for a month.
Totally.
You never know.
So that's true. I mean, our as is product line, or the paint grade line, is very affordable. And we strive to sell our products at 30 to 50% less than new from that perspective. In the new refurbished line, we're still going to be lower, but it's not going to be as much. Hopefully 10 to 20% less than new, which is still good. And then, I don't know if people know this, the money's all in the hardware. That's where most of your like your door package cost is going to, is hardware packages. And so we still sell reclaimed hardware, and there's a great deal to be had there. So we can have a pretty compelling cost savings, I think, when it comes down to it. So
yeah. Did you have to learn a lot about door hardware ahead of all this working, or learn as you go?
And I think you would as well. I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you like writing hardware sets?
Oh, I hate.
Why is that?
Sets. It's it's when you have to specify a hardware set. It's knowing all the little components you need for the code and how the door functions, but then everything is numbers and letters, and you mess up like one number and it's a completely different functional thing. But then when you talk to different hardware reps and you see it in person, or you see it installed, whether it's right or wrong, when it's wrong, it's blatantly obvious in the field when you see it. But when you're writing it and you have to, it's a long spec section. Most architects aren't in the specs as much, or even were taught specifications, and then you're getting down to the fine-grained details of it. It can be overwhelming. And then when you get it wrong, people are very
And
angry. It
it's
takes
expensive,
money and
right? And then
time.
you're replacing
Yeah.
hardware sets, and that's really expensive. We've ultimately been the beneficiary of that, of having mistake hardware that was ordered wrong. I will say, what you experienced, I don't think is an accident. I think it's that process is intentionally made obscure with letters and switches and numbers, which like I know all those now. I can generally figure out. I might have. I know how to look them up if I don't, but it's meant to confuse the architect and the owner and the contractor, where they just kind of throw their hands up and say like, I don't know, I need to just defer to the manufacturer or to the rep or whatever. And then it allows them to kind of put in whatever they want. And so that's part of the industry, which I think I have an axe to grind about it, but it's also been an opportunity for us to deliver just really good service, because we can cut through that crap and say, someone sends me a manufacturer spec and I can just redline it and be like, you don't need all these things. These are totally superfluous. This is the most expensive version possible of this product. Like, and so all of a sudden people are like, oh, wow, look how much that helped, you know? And so having someone who's also interested in, I think, helping customers just both save money, but also I believe we should have the simplest hardware sets possible that do the job. The more complex they get, the more people have a hard time with them and the more they cost. Complicated keying systems end up being subverted because people then start taping over doors because no one knows which key to use. And like this thing was like, doesn't work. And like they've already paid for it, right? And so we see stuff like that all the time. And I think it's, again, good customer service to help streamline that process for customers.
Yeah, because I know a lot of times we default to just getting a door hardware consultant. And so it's a whole consultant just pretty much doing that spec section.
Now, is that from a manufacturer or is it independent?
We do both. So it depends. I prefer not to go directly through a manufacturer because then they're just going to specify all of their products. I'd rather go with an independent consultant because they will be more honest with making sure the right products on there, it's consistent, because I also know there's different lines with different manufacturers and it can be really hard to figure out what's the Cadillac version of what's in there versus more standard. And when you just need something standard, the manufacturer odds are going to specify the Cadillac
Of course.
version.
No, absolutely. Because that's what their interest is. So I think you'll get good quality out of an independent consultant, but you're paying for it, right? And that's the whole point where the manufacturers will do it for free. And then they get to like increase the size of the hardware package by like 50%. You'd be surprised how much more you can spend another $300 per door just in little things that they slip in there. So is what it is. Anyway,
so there's definitely a lot to learn.
We can talk about hardware. We can have a whole podcast just about hardware if you want, Katelyn, but I know that's probably not what you brought me here for. But it is one of those things that I think is maybe different than other product categories where there's so much complexity and then so much, obfuscation that's happening. When you get to other product types, I think it's probably easier for an architect to understand more closely what the products are. So I think maybe that's an advantage, maybe that's not an advantage if someone else were going to want to start a business working with other product types, which honestly is what I've been trying to do, is trying to encourage other businesses to launch and to really cultivate an ecosystem of material reuse enterprises, which is beneficial for all of us, in my opinion.
Yeah, I know on one of our calls, you even had somebody sit in on the call, just see how our conversation went.
That's right,
using reclaimed products. And I thought that was really fantastic because, it's not somebody you're hiring to come on in their training. No, they're trying to start their own reclaimed business.
Yeah.
So what were they working on?
Brad was working on roofing. he was actually working on surplus stuff. And so roofing is probably one of those products that's going to be a little bit of a difficult sell from a reclaim standpoint. Just who's going to risk like an old roof on their home or on their building? And so, but he's found a little niche to just get surplus that, the last 10% that's ordered doesn't get used. And so it just essentially becomes waste. And so kind of capturing that and selling it in small projects. So it's pretty cool what he was doing. He just wanted to come through and see how we worked and just ask a lot of good questions. So I gave him the opportunity to see what it's like to talk to customers and architects and things like that. So that was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. And just, seeing behind the curtain without, fully taking a leap or having to hire somebody, but being able to help.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Super
yeah,
important. And definitely the surpluses, like, the contractor's always ordering like 20% over on tile roof shingles for residential. And it's, where's that go in the end? It sits
attic stock,
in
right?
the owner's
Exactly.
shelf. Like,
attic stock. There's so much material tied up in attic stock right now that no one's going to use.
yeah, I know. I have a lot of clients that just don't even want attic stock
Really?
anymore, or only on particular things, and because they're out of space. They have so much attic stock from all these other projects, then it just sits there, and then by the time it needs updated or changed, they do a whole complete redesign or fit out for, the bigger clients.
I mean, I think maybe the percentages of attic stock are too high. But ultimately, if you wait long enough, the attic stock's not going to match anyway. Right. If it's a couple years, exactly. Right. And so I think the whole idea was that it's like a good fit and it's going to not stand out, but it's going to stand out anyway. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, good on them. That's good. No. That's good.
But I guess since your education is architecture, how did you know you wanted to pivot into focusing just on sustainable practices with all the different consulting opportunities and entrepreneurship?
I took a class in sustainable design in college, and it sort of lit my fire. I was like, wow, there's like so much that needs to be done and so much that can to be done. Dating myself, but that was right as LEED was released. And so we look at LEED today and it's rather passe, right? It's like, okay, oh, you got a LEED certification. Great. That's like number like 998,055, right? Like, who cares?
Yeah, I don't find it unique anymore. I find like passive house unique.
Right. And so at the time, it was a way of streamlining what were really like fringe experimental ideas at the time. And so the whole thing just fit. I was raised with a mindset of environmentalism and just, use what you have and don't waste. Spent a bit of time as a youngster as a dumpster diver and finding great furniture and things like that. But knowing I didn't want to be in architectural practice, I have always just found opportunities to kind of be in the margins, I think. That would, whether it's a consultant, as a green building consultant, as a sustainability consultant. At Green Building Alliance, I was essentially a nonprofit sustainability consultant, right? Doing technical systems and helping people get through the process to yield the outcome that we wanted them to achieve. I think it got different when I launched Doors Unhinged, because I realized from all this experience that when you're on the outside, there's only so much you can do. You can make recommendations, people don't take them. And I think there was a lot of policy talk about, oh, we need material reuse. People should reuse materials. It's like a zero carbon product, and that's all the solutions for that. And I just looked at it. I was like, we're never gonna get to that change if someone doesn't get in there and then show people how to do it and show that it's a thing that can be done. I would argue that's been our number one innovation in this space, has been changing the conversation from if and why to how and when and where. And I'm not going to take credit for everything that happens in commercial material reuse, but I am going to take credit for the conversation happening that we can do this. We get referred to all the time, all over the country, as an example of what's possible. And, when we started this, there was like, people just couldn't even grasp it. They're like, what? Like, why would we do that? I mean, and so it took 3, 4, 5, 6 years for people to be like, oh, this actually can work. And so suddenly we're a case study, which again is the whole point, that it should not stop with us, but we should have the whole ecosystem. And so that's what's been really exciting, is that we're not trying to corner the market on material reuse. If we do that, it's going to stay so small. And I think we have the opportunity to really make this national market and just build companies based on the principles and the nuance of how to work in commercial construction that no one had ever sat down and figured out. And so now that I've done that, we're going to try and essentially get others to do that. I mentioned the work in Minnesota. We have a proposal out for a state grant to essentially do training of entrepreneurs in the Minneapolis area, just to train them on what it means to run a material reuse business, especially in commercial, and not just start another reuse center, but to think really strategically and think from an ecosystem standpoint. So I think that's where the excitement and the opportunity is how do we see this growing organically around the country, and how do we support each other, and how do we become a network instead of trying to do the capitalist thing, which is to try and block everyone out and control our intellectual property. And ultimately, I think would be to everyone's detriment.
Yeah, because you can't just have one person do that. And there's so many products. Like, you can't
specialize in everything.
Do that. You need to focus.
You can't be a specialist in everything. Doesn't make you a specialist anymore, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Then you're just a generalist and, not have enough product to actually get projects
That's
done.
right. That's right.
And it be a viable business. Like, you're making a profit, you're making a living. It's not like you're doing it for free. Like, it does help.
But I feed my family. I feed my family this way. Right. And that's, I mean, sure, it's honorable, but at the end of the day, we can achieve these outcomes while still, having a good job that allows my family to do what they want to do, and us to enjoy life and not feel like we have to sacrifice. Nor do we expect our customers to do it just because it's the right thing to do, even though maybe it's harder, the quality is lower, the customer's unhappy, right? Who's going to do it in the face of all those things if it's just the right thing to do, right? We need to make it a win for everyone, including ourselves. And I think that's what we've built.
Yeah, because I don't think really my office even knew that I was getting reclaimed doors, except for the small project team working on it.
It's great.
Then when they came in, I was like, hey, did you know, like, this is all reused? This isn't new. Like, the hardware is not new. We got it all to work. And they were all shocked. And it's been working fine. It's not like, things came in dented. It's not like paint was chipping.
Right. And
it's just...
That is actually the biggest compliment for us, is for someone to walk through one of our doors and not look at it a second time. Just assume it's just a door like any other door in a building, right? We want people to feel like it's totally unimpressive. It's just a door.
Yeah. It's not calling your attention to it. And for an office of architects and designers, and nobody's come up to me even saying like, hey, what's wrong with this? Or what's off over here? Because, we have magnifying glass on our own work.
That's right. Sometimes people call us looking for kind of trophy, bespoke, reclaimed products. And I'm sure there's a market for that, but it's not going to be us. there's
Yeah.
people are so picky when it comes to that they basically want a custom door that's happens to be reclaimed, which is just like unicorn, like, sorry. So we used to humor that. Now it's just like, go find it yourself. We don't have that stuff. And we don't take that stuff anymore, which we did for a little bit. That's just a part of the learning process.
So if you didn't do doors, what would be a different product you would look at?
Right now, I don't have enough experience in it, but structural steel. Structural steel. So steel, just the production of steel accounts for like 10% of all CO2 emissions globally. All of them, not just like the building sector, like 10%, right? So steel is another product that's really high impact, right? In the carbon. It's very expensive. It's also pretty it's not a public facing product, right? It's hidden behind walls and inside, envelopes. And so it doesn't have to look aesthetically pleasing. You can be collected and thrown into a yard, right? And we don't have to treat it the way we treat these finished materials. To me, the math is about what is the value of the product new relative to, say, what scrap value is, because scrap value is your competitor. And so we're looking for multipliers of like between 30 and 50, because that's the place where you can spend the effort to get the material back and then still make a good chunk of change. If it's down in 10, like, you can put a lot of effort in and then you'll be scraping by. So, because you need to pay for the effort and for the value of the material much more than scrap. It can't be just a little bit more, because it's more work and more coordination. So if it's like 5 times scrap value, right? But then we still have 25 to 50x of that value left, we're in great shape. I think there's going to be a lot more attention paid to structural steel, and we need. There's a great case study out of Boulder where they deconstructed this whole hospital and they have all the structural steel. I think it's still sitting there in Boulder, that like anyone who wants it can essentially get it for basically free. The problem is there's no one there to smooth out the transaction. People have to like
that transition, and
right. Right. Who's going to,
because at that point you need it like thoroughly documented, what it is, what size, what members, and marks,
and adapted. So it's going to have different connections, right? And so you got to take off the old connections, put on the new connection. Are you cutting it shorter? Testing. Who's going to test it to verify that it meets, strength requirements? I'm not a structural engineer, so I'm not naturally able to solve those problems. But what I know is like what the process of capturing materials and doing something is. Imagine Pittsburgh becoming the home of steel again by being the center of reclaimed steel. We take all the steel from the East Coast and we bring it back to, say, Braddock via barge and train and deposit it in these old steel mill factories. And then, we're gonna create the regenerative economy again here in Pittsburgh. So
that would be an awesome experiment to do. But like even the taller buildings, because the columns don't go all the way up the entire skyscraper. There's bolted connections along the way. So even if you dismantled a 8-story building and you only needed 4, you're probably close to where that connection point is. And at least you could reuse half the steel. It'll probably be a little bit oversized, but a lot cheaper than, having to go put a tonnage order in, and steel we have to do a lot of early packages for. It's done. It'll not only save you cost, but it'll save you time, because it's already done.
So I wouldn't expect to do like high-rise buildings or anything like that, but you can do like
but the smaller
ones. You can do a 1-story like warehouse style building, no problem. What's interesting though is like they already have to dismantle the steel. they're not tipping the building over, right? This isn't like Jenga, right? So like we got to like they have to carefully move it. So the question is, what happens after you do that? Does it just get thrown on the ground and into a dumpster? Or does it get neatly set aside and then, or immediately onto a flatbed truck, right? That then is going to the train depot and then going on a rail, right? It's just, it's like tweaking that process. That's what's
because we
exciting.
can already, if you've got like block, you can always grind it down and put it back into the site itself and make a different mixture, and working with the civil engineer to do that. But you can't really grind up steel to make it into just the land. It's got to go somewhere.
That's right. So it's, I think what I like to say when thinking about products is each product is going to have a totally different process in how it gets taken out and handled and sold back. Who the customer is, like what needs to happen in between, what assurances and certifications people want, and refinishing whatever it is. Here's another one, aluminum storefront. Aluminum is number 3 on the offenders list of building materials, 1 being steel, 2 being concrete, or vice versa, and 3 being aluminum. So how do we take aluminum out of buildings and then because it's so public, it needs to look really good. So it needs to go through some process that, does it get sandblasted? Can you just re-anodize it? What is that process? But there's a way to do it, right? We shouldn't have to just melt it back down and then re-extrude it. So we looked at aluminum storefront for a while, mostly from a door standpoint, but we can't just sell the door, right? It's a whole systems issue where we got to sell the door, the frame, the glazing, right? The whole storefront. And I don't want to do all that. I just wanted the door. And that I was trying to pull that piece out of the system and it didn't work.
Yeah, because that would be another good one. I know I did a project recently and it was interior fit outs, but a client had done this whole process, had a brand new building, and then they decided to relocate their headquarters to a different city. And so it was the first time I walked through a project that I would have to demo that looks like I should be walking through it to punch list. And it was heartbreaking. New furniture, new walls, new all the glazing systems for all the offices.
Totally.
And unfortunately, we weren't putting in a new like corporate client, because then at least the client types, we were changing it over to higher education and some labs. But at least the client was trying, okay, we're going to try to reuse this furniture elsewhere on campus and try to do some things. But it was just heartbreaking to like, and we even tried to keep some of it, but it was like, with what we needed to do, I'm like, this isn't going to work. And it was just painful. Like I don't feel bad when it's like yellow gross ceiling tile and mold growing out of certain areas. But when it's
brand new,
those last pivots and it looks brand new, all you have to do is be careful with dismantling it. And there had to have been at least 60 offices. So it's like 60 fronts of offices that weren't like too big.
And the great thing about those aluminum is those are all screwed connections. And so that means you can literally disassemble stuff, shorten it, right? I would actually love to see if we can lengthen it, if we can like somehow weld it back together. I think that'd be awesome. So then because all that stuff comes out as kit parts, right? It's practically like erector set stuff, and literally you're assembling these little pieces in these screws. And once you know how it goes and you get all this stuff, there's like only a couple manufacturers of aluminum out there in storefront, right? So it's going to be this one or this one. And like you keep them separate and then all of a sudden you have these matching kits.
Yeah. And typically it's the same thing. Like once you do an office front, like all 60 of those were the exact same. And so it's, hey, even if you don't need 60, if you need 30,
that's right.
It's already done. And then you still have another 30 to help another project.
See, you're getting the hang of this, Katelyn. You can do it.
There's opportunities.
There is abound.
And I always like wrapping up my podcast with this final question. And it's, what advice do you have for young professionals just starting their career?
Are we talking about architects?
We can. You can take it any direction you want.
I would we'll talk about architects at least for a second and say, I think architects come out of school preparing to do exceptional architecture. That everything is a monument to design, because that's sort of like the training is in design, and the training is not in how do we solve problems for our customers, how do we solve problems of the world. And I would encourage people to think of their skills in a really broad sense, that it can be applied in a lot of different ways. I'm shocked by the fact that, like, I don't think architects are particularly used to working with their hands. And I think there's something lost there in really understanding how materials work and come together. And like to really stand back and look at brochures and, websites and get in there, get your hands dirty. Like whether it's some apprentice training, or I know there are people that do little sessions on hands-on things, but there's a lot to learn, and I think there's a big world out there outside of doing traditional architectural design. For other people just starting out, I think in general, don't be afraid to try and bend the rules. And I think people look at Doors Unhinged and say, oh yeah, that makes sense. But early on, we really had to bend the rules because people were like, can you do that? Are you allowed to use a reclaimed this or that? And then it's just like, I'm going to do it until someone tells me I can't. If it's legal, as in like meets code, right? And it meets the customer's needs, why should we not do this? And I think people get stuck in these things about how things should be. So go out there and break some rules, and see what happens. And you'd be surprised. I think that's where a lot of innovation comes from, is people that are pushing boundaries and breaking norms. That's where the exciting stuff is. And I don't know, I think the future is ultimately going to be in material reuse and strategies to make the stuff we have now look like the stuff we want to have in the future. It's an exciting world out there. Let's get started. So,
yeah. And I think that's great advice, because I feel some people they look at material reuse and feel like they have to fix everything. And you don't need to. Like, you're niche down to doors, and it's at least taking one step. I know that even reflects to how I started mentorDINO, seeing the gaps in the AEC profession. And it's okay, I can't fix everything right now, but I can start doing baby steps to start helping. Because if nobody's going to take initial steps, the gaps are going to get bigger. The issues with material reuse are going to get larger. Like, you got to take some kind of movement forward, but understand you don't have to fix the entire world in a day.
That's right.
Type scenario.
And not to be, I'll be dystopic just for a second. I don't really like to talk about it, but like, we have a looming scarcity problem with our materials. And so what does that mean for the entire industry? Like, no one's really been able to answer that. We're just going to kind of keep building. It's like we already hit peak oil. What is peak? Is there a peak steel, right? Is there a peak concrete? Is there a peak aluminum? Maybe, probably. So there's going to be peak something or other. And so let's plan our industry's resilience now, instead of waiting for it to be kind of forced on us and be cataclysmic. And so I think it takes those steps and that slightly discomforting thinking now to get ourselves ready for, I would say, a different future.
Yeah. And just helping everybody. Like, you're helping professionals around the industry create their own reuse areas. So I think it's fantastic to create a bigger movement with it too. So
fantastic.
But thank you so much, Andrew, for taking the time to speak with me. If anybody wants to get a hold of you, or has doors they want to give over to you, or want to buy from you, So, what's the best way to get a hold of you guys?
Just go to our website, doorsunhinged.com, and you can find contact info there. Drop an email, and we'd love to connect with you about your project. Or if you just want to learn more, see what kind of projects we've done. Also, I'd probably spend more time posting on LinkedIn. So go follow me on LinkedIn, search me up, and you can see the kinds of things that we've been doing over the last few years. And hopefully there'll be some great announcements ahead as to what's going to be coming out in 2025.
Yeah, and I'll leave the link to your website and your LinkedIn down below in the show notes, so it's real easy for anybody to find you. And I'm really excited to hear all the announcements in 2025, and I appreciate the sneak peek.
Yeah,
In
my
knowing
pleasure.
what's going on.
Glad to be able to share it. Well, thanks for
All right,
having me on, Katelyn.
Yep, thank you so much, Andrew. I hope you enjoyed our discussion today. Learn some advice to take with you and see how our industry is all tied together to create the world around us. Check out the description below for any links or resources we discussed. If you liked the episode, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. Give me a thumbs up and leave a comment below. It really helps others be able to discover this resource and support finding that career path that best works for them. If you know someone that has inspired your own career that you'd like me to interview, let me know in the comments below, or you can reach out to me via my website or LinkedIn. I'd be happy to share their story or your own. Thank you again, and I cannot wait for the next career story I get to share with you next week.